Good afternoon, Jelle.
Good afternoon, Chris.
That's that's a very enthusiastic tone. And right before I hit record, actually, I knew you were a lot more enthusiastic. So how are you? Tell me.
I'm very good. I'm very good. It's a pretty cold morning, or pretty cold afternoon already.
Yes.
Here. So it's I think the first frost actually. So yeah.
It is. And of course, the audience doesn't know the audience that's listening to us and the audience that's watching us. And when you're listening to this via iTunes, the podcast, or watching the video cast via YouTube, they don't know. They can see the backdrop of where you are, but they don't know where you are. So let's hit it off with the first question and tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you come from, where you are right now, and tell us a bit about your cultural frame of reference. That should keep you going for the coming 10 minutes, I guess.
Yeah, okay, because that was a whole list.
Yes.
Where I come from, well, that is also a bit of a
mystery.
Mystery, not a mystery, but yeah, it's difficult always to define where we come from because we come from so many places. But I was born in Suriname. My parents were there. Actually, my father wanted to do his civil duty instead of going to the army. So he worked there in the hospital in Paramaribo.
Which is the capital of that
which
country?
Is the capital of Suriname. And they liked the place quite a lot. And they ended up staying there for many more years than they were supposed to. But then a few things happened in Suriname which didn't go as they hoped they would go. And then they were actually sort of forced to come back to Belgium. And then they started a new life. And actually, I don't remember much from the whole Suriname experience, but it's always been there as when I was growing up, because a lot of the friends of my parents obviously were in these international circles, and we end up flying all over the world. We end up going a lot as kids to Africa, but also I remember going to Haiti, seeing the slums in Haiti at the age of, 13 years, after a stop in Florida when we went to the Magic Kingdom. So I think
that's quite a contrast, isn't it?
Yes, I think I was exposed there at a very early age to the biggest two contrasts that we have in this world. And I think ever since that start at birth, we always kept on traveling, and it sort of stuck. And although I've lived most of my schooling life in Belgium, I've always been out for the major holidays, and that continued. I studied then in Leuven, which is in Belgium. And also there, I always chose for the most international option, or every time I could find a reason to travel and explore new countries, new continents.
Yes,
I was always eager to go. So over the years, I've visited many places. I've lived a big chunk of my life in Belgium, obviously. But after university, or during university, I also did one part of my studies in Singapore, and I did my thesis in Pakistan.
Okay.
And there's many more projects that I've done in between as volunteer. Either in Indonesia, I've done a volunteering project. I've also been involved as a volunteer in Rodrigues, an island off Mauritius. So anyway, where am I from? I think all of those places and all of those experiences have brought a lot of me. And I wouldn't consider myself Belgian.
Okay.
Belgians already have a...
You're not the average Belgian.
No. But I think Belgium is already an interesting country because of our history as Belgium. So, I like to think of myself as a European. And currently I am in Belgium. I'm back home after a trip of about 3 weeks in Sri Lanka.
Okay.
And Yeah, I'm trying to think of all the questions that you asked. So
I'll run them by you again. Don't worry. We're just listening, and we're trying to get into the atmosphere here. So, if I'm not mistaken, you are from the same city. You are currently in the same place that I am in.
Oh, really?
Yes, I'm in Leuven as well. And if that's your hometown, then we could actually maybe switch off the mic and scream at each other if you're not that far. I didn't tell you about that. I'm sorry. No.
No. I thought you were. Yeah.
I am a Dutchman. Yes, I mean by
Yes.
my Dutch accent you could tell, but no, I've been living in Belgium for the last 10 years, and majority of the time actually here in this wonderful little university city called Leuven, which is about 20 kilometers east of Brussels. And Brussels, the majority of the people will actually know as being the capital of Europe, where everything with the European Union happens. Remember that?
Absolutely. And
So-
a lot of things happening.
This is just, painting the picture for the majority of the audience, which you do not know, Jelle, is are American. About 50% of the audience comes from the United States, and the rest of the other 50% comes from the rest of the world. So we have a very interesting and a very international community that actually picks up on this
Okay, good
podcast.
to
So
know.
you know who you're talking to, more or less.
Yeah. Perfect.
If I just want to flip back to a couple of things that you mentioned. You said your parents spent some time in Suriname. You were actually too small to remember. Does that mean that your dad was a Dutchman or is a Dutchman? Because Suriname, possibly at that time, was still a colony of the Netherlands, which gained its independence in 1975, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct. But no, my parents are both Belgian. They're both Flemish. The reason is that it was part of our international corporation from government.
Right.
And
Okay, so you don't know anything about you can't remember anything about Suriname.
Well, not really. But the thing is, over the years, I wonder which part of the pictures became memories and which. So there's this fine line. I was definitely too young to have very active recollections. Although I do remember or think of Suriname with great enthusiasm.
Yeah, for those of you who are geographically impaired, as they say, Suriname is in the north of South America, and it's right next to Venezuela. That in terms of putting it in a geographical position. There's not sure if is French Guiana in between there. Or is that on the other side?
So there's French Guiana, which is still French property, and there's then Guyana on the other side.
Oh, yeah.
And it all sits on top of the Amazon rainforest. So actually, basically, Suriname is almost entirely rainforest.
Green, yes.
So it's
exactly. It's one of those elusive places that I've always wanted to visit and never actually got to visit. But it's still on my list. And for the prime reason actually that I would like to go there is that it's very awkward to fly like 12 hours and then come in a tropical country where they actually speak your home language. And that's a very awkward experience that I've had in a couple of those Caribbean islands, which apparently are still part of the Netherlands. You said you grew up, basically you're an expat kid, right?
Well, I think that's how I feel, although that my entire life has been, or most of my normal schooling has been in Belgium.
Okay.
So I followed majority of the normal steps, not all of them. Mostly I followed the normal Belgian schooling system until I was 18 years.
Okay, all right, fair enough. So you're not a true expat kid, but you were certainly bitten by a travel bug from a very early age.
Yeah, well, and the thing is, every holiday possible, we were not in Belgium, so it felt like
And not in Belgium means that would also be further than France, for instance.
No, we would be in Africa, we would be in America, we would be in Asia, we would be. No, it would definitely be further away than Europe.
So if you and then you said in your introduction, with all this, you said I'm not the average Belgian. So how does this influence, or how do you think this has influenced you as a kid growing up to be now a mature adult? How does that make you differ from, as in using your words, the average Belgian?
I think it has well, the fact that I'm running businesses which are on two different continents is probably one of the things that Belgians, being quite risk averse, would not really dive into.
Yeah.
So in that way, I've always had this. I've never sensed that abroad or foreign culture is something to be afraid of or is the unknown. It is rather the want to be known. Then
you incorporate it as you grow up.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah.
Okay, the reason I'm asking is because I have a daughter. She's 12 years old, and she's from a child. She's growing into a young woman, etc., towards being an adult as well. And she's half Indian and half Dutch. We live in Belgium, so I see her, this outgoingness as well as part of her personality. But as easily as anything else, she just goes to Paris, she goes to Dubai, then she goes to New York, and just like that. It's the world is just it's much broader, and I think that might be your view as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that being really more of a citizen of the world kind of a thing, I love Belgium. I love Leuven. It's great. It's a great city. But I also find it very limiting to think of ourselves as only as being in that box. And the world has so much to offer, so much to learn. Yes. And I think that has been instilled in me from a very, very young age in traveling, because then you're forced to reconcile the fact that there are people who have a very different value system from yours, and still they seem to be able to get along quite nicely and create wonderful things. Yeah. So the knowledge that whatever you've been taught is not the only wisdom is quite humbling. Mm-hmm. And I think in that sense, it's very interesting to incorporate that and just also see what the opportunities are with the world that we have today, because the world that we have today is no longer the village of when my parents grew up.
Yeah, it's exactly. I mean, you don't have to go back 500 years. Go back 20, 30 years and you're there.
That's long enough.
Yeah, true.
I often think that, look, for me going now to Sri Lanka, it's like going on a bus. It's like a no-brainer. I go take the train, I get on a plane, I'm there. And then when I even have to think that, okay, it's even only 35 years ago or 30 years ago that my parents went to Suriname, and already that must have been quite a thing. Like, they were still communicating with letters, like the feedback time for, like, okay, this kid is born. Okay, what's his name? That kind of, okay, no, those are not the questions that you ask. So this whole dynamic is changing, and I think that is very interesting, and it offers a lot of opportunities to people of my generation, but even more for the next generations that are. And for that, I think the matter that you're tackling, culture, it is really, a very important aspect to be aware of, but also to understand its limitations. Yeah, but also understand, where we need to take, other people's culture into consideration and what other people think is insensitive and not sensitive. So.
Yes. Yeah, good point. Is there, getting to this, because it's not always a business podcast, because we have all kinds of different people being a guest, like yourselves as well. But you are an entrepreneur. You call yourself a serial entrepreneur as well. Being an entrepreneur and working for the company that you work for, which is 0 Point, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
You say it very doubtful.
No. It's funny that you say work for. Yes, but I work with. Yeah.
Okay, but, you are part of that organization. You started that organization.
Yeah.
Fair enough. I'd like to talk about that in a moment as well. But my question first is a step back, and is why do you think, with the experience you have working internationally, for you, as you said yourself, this is a no-brainer. Understanding different cultures is a no-brainer. Still, there are so many organizations in the world that work internationally, and they shrug their shoulders and they say it's my way or the highway, or we're just going to roll out this blueprint and it should work in every other country. Why do you think companies brush over cultural differences so easily and so fast?
I think it's just the McDonald's model. You have one hamburger chain and you have your hamburgers and all your French fries coming from the same place. It's just easier to work that way.
But does it work?
No, I think one of the reasons that I'm not working for one of those organizations and that I started my own company is because in certain settings, you have to marvel at the beauty and efficiency of scaling up things and have a model like, Henry Ford had, or McDonald's for that matter. But in certain settings, you have to be aware of the context in which you operate. Yeah. And if you lose feeling of that context, strange things happen. So I think that a lot of large corporations, previously they still had a lot to offer, which would just like put that under the rug, the whole cultural dimension, or even the whole people dimension, because there was a lot to offer, because a lot of know-how was coming in. But I think that balance is very much tilting in a different direction, because, well, now technology is available for everyone quite democratically. Yeah. So now I think these big organizations have to really redefine how they work with people, especially across borders and across cultural barriers. And I think culture is a big part, being Indian or subcontinent or Europe or that part of culture. But I also think large organizations will have to rethink their working culture of how do we deal with people to begin with. But that's a whole other...
well, it's getting more and more important, but there's a slow movement. But I think it's a really slow movement. To what extent, Jelle, does your background, or to what extent has your background, your multicultural experience, if you want, how has that assisted you in doing running the business that you currently do? And could you possibly point out where things could have gone different or wrong, possibly? Would you not have that experience?
No, that's an interesting question. I think with 0.1, one of the most important nuts that we're trying to crack is that we believe that virtual teams, or teams that are like you and me, right now we're sort of a team. We're trying to work something to create something else. But virtual teams, in the sense that people who haven't met before today, that are working together across cultural boundaries in different time zones. I think there's a really big puzzle to solve in how we can do that in the most efficient, collaborative way in which all parties gain. And I think that specific solving or trying to work, it's a gigantic puzzle, but for us working on that puzzle day in, day out, is, I think, in part because of the history that both I and my business partner have. Because we've had this multicultural exposure, we've seen that people in other countries are just as bright, just as skilled, just as ambitious. So I think we've seen the fact that whatever country you're from, basically we all have similar ideas and ambitions in life. It's our culture colors it in a different way. But once we get to see that, we say, okay, look, if there's going to be the internet, and if there's going to be Skype, and if there's going to be, how are companies of the future going to exist? Because why would I sit in my car for 2 hours in the morning in a traffic jam to reach somewhere, to sit next to someone just to be able to send him an email?
Yes.
That is not very efficient. So, and I think I've only started to think of that puzzle because of the history that I had in studying in Singapore, working in, and traveling across the world.
All right. Okay. Good point. Thanks for answering that. Talking about Singapore, and then I'd like to move on to what 0 Point does in outsourcing and offshoring, as it's stated on your LinkedIn profile. Why did you pick Singapore because you did a master's there, correct?
Well, I did part of my master's there. Yeah, it was the Wharton School had an affiliate there in Singapore called the Singapore Management University. And it was a university that came well recommended. And in our program for exchange, it was the Erasmus Mundus program.
Yes.
And typically that is an exchange which is happening between European universities, that students will go from one university to the next for about a year. Mm-hmm. So, but I had the privilege to attend to the international version of that, and Singapore came up. And I had also an option to go to India or any European country at the mm-hmm. time. And at the time, I was really focused on China becoming such a big powerhouse. And I was just in my early 20s. And I wanted to get a taste of Asia. Mm-hmm. And actually, Singapore is a beautiful melting pot mm-hmm. of worlds in which all worlds combine, mm-hmm. yet they make their own culture worthwhile. Okay. And I think it's interesting to see, because it's mainly Chinese. Then there's also a large population from the subcontinent, but it has this Buddhist, Hindu, Muslim mix, which is just creating something very beautiful. And for me, it was just a nice gateway to get more Asia without really, I think I've learned probably much more in Singapore mm-hmm. than I would have learned if I would have gone to maybe any of those countries that directly. So. Yeah. It's really a gateway to a lot of cultures, a lot of ideas, a lot of innovation.
Yes. Okay. So and how long did you stay there then?
I was there. It was I stayed a little bit longer, but it was like in 1 year. Mm-hmm. I had to do so many courses and.
Yeah. Nice. That's a nice place. It's
as
they say, it's a fine city, right?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't. That's probably a city I wouldn't mind living in.
I can imagine. I can very much imagine. Yes. Talk about Zero Point, the company that you started, being the entrepreneur that you are. Say you work in outsourcing and offshoring. Tell us a little bit what that is, and where you think that culture plays a role in that.
So
what do you do at first?
Yeah, basically what we do is. If I specifically look at Belgium, we have about, I don't know the exact numbers, but it's about, only for Belgium, it's about 16,000 ICT vacancies for which there are no people. Yeah. So there's just not enough people to fill the gaps in for programmers, software engineers. And the problem is that the economy and the demand for these skills is growing, but our supply from the labor market is staying somewhat the same. Mm-hmm. So the problem which we have right now with 16,000 people, and in Europe we're talking about hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, is a problem that's only going to increase over the next 15 years. So we also, Bart, my business partner, he worked for HP for a long time. Before we started this company, actually, not that long. Yeah. But he had this experience with Indian outsourcing, and everyone was like saying how terrible it was and how it's not working. And that really contrasted with what we had sensed when we were traveling and even working and studying overseas. Right. That, look, it is possible. Mm-hmm. Just need to go about it with the right tools. Uh-huh. And part of those tools is, of course, dealing with the culture. Mm-hmm. So that is definitely something that was with us for.
So Zero Point focuses on finding IT qualified people in the subcontinent of India who fill positions that cannot be filled here. So are you getting these people here, or do you take a project and do you let them execute it there?
Yeah. The business model that we had set up is we specifically wanted to look at long-term partnerships, because one of the things that I think was a failure in the outsource model as it was applied before, it was like a quick fix to a certain problem. Mm-hmm. Whereas I think that this specific if you really want to make offshore and working with teams over a distance work together, you need to invest in the relationship.
Yes, very much. Typically in those countries.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not like I take one and it's going to work automatically. It's like, no, we have to get to know the person. We have to know what is his background, what is his culture. So our approach to this was that, look, we will set up our own centers in Southeast Asia. So we have one center in Islamabad, Pakistan, where we recruit and hire people who work for international customers of ours. And we have one center in Colombo, Sri Lanka. So we really also wanted both of those locations to be under our control rather than outsourcing this whole thing ourselves. Because we really wanted to feel that, look, this working with virtual teams can work. But there are a few rules that you need to abide by. And this is also something that we demand from our customers, is that if you want to make this work, it has to be a long-term engagement. Yeah. So what we do is we imagine that a customer in the US or in Europe says that, look, we can't find the people, we need a skilled people with XYZ skills. We say, okay, look, we're going to look at the dynamics of your team. We're going to look at how your team interacts. We're going to look at the strengths of your team, the weaknesses of your team, and then we're going to try to find a team that will, work good with the team that you're.
Complement that one, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So, but that also entails a lot of training of the American or the European team, because it's also a lot of their mindset that has to change of how we can work with an international team.
Right. So does that run smoothly? Or, I mean, the answer must be yes, because otherwise you would not be in business. Are organizations, and I'm primarily thinking about Americans who want everything quick. What do you mean invest a day? I have an hour for you, 20 minutes. I mean, I'm exaggerating here, and I'm not trying to offend 50% of the audience being American. Nonetheless, it's something. Yeah, how do you convince them that this is worth their investment in terms of time?
Well, often it comes from a failed experience elsewhere.
Okay. Yes.
So that's always that could be one way. It's also maybe a negative way, but I think we cannot target the average company either, because to be able to work in an international setting, you need to have a certain mindset, a certain, procedural, not procedure down to that, but at least a structural mindset. And if you've already invested in structure, chances are, like, how are we going to communicate? What kind of meetings are we going to run? What is important to this company? If you are already investing on that level in your organization, then you'll also realize that, look, if we're going to have a kick-ass software project or a software that will be core of our enterprise, then we also need to invest in the people that will actually make it. And if I can't bring that point home, then that's fine, because obviously those people are making a business and they're making a lot of money, but those are probably not a match with whatever services that we're offering. And in that case, I would probably not suggest them to work with any outsourcing company to begin with. I think those customers would better be served with people that come to their office and talk to them.
Right. Yes. Yeah. You cannot be a jack of all trades here. That does not make sense. So if I would be making use of your services as a 0 Point as a company, would I deal with you only, or would I deal with, say, my Indian long-term non-employee relationship?
We actually have a model that goes in what we call, it's actually we call it the OM model, which is OM. OM could be, actually, I hadn't thought of that. That's
okay.
Nice insight. Thank you for that.
Well, that's for free. There you go. Welcome.
Free consultancy.
No problem.
Later. But in Dutch, OM actually stands for, what does it stand for? You're also Dutch. You can translate.
Like uncle.
Uncle. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, and the thing is, we wanted to be a guide in the companies that we guide in this process as an uncle, not as the paternalistic father who tells you do this, do this, do this, but we're more there as like, okay, if you need advice of how to work better with your team, we're there. We can train you, we can show you the ropes, but we can give you the best practices. But in the end, it's you who's going to have to make it work. It's your project, it's your software. We'll make sure that you have the right people, they are excellently skilled, but it's still that connection is still yours to make. And we build bridges, but in the end, it's the customer that has to maintain and walk on it every day.
So at first, I'm in touch with you, and then eventually you hand that over to the Indian counterpart. Let's stick with India. And occasionally, if there's a bump in the road, that I can get back to you and say, listen, we need some streamlining here and there.
Exactly. So there's with the O model, we try to say, okay, look, the most important connection that you have is you directly with the team that's working on because they are dedicated, working exclusively only for your project. Right. We also like to have customers see them as their own employees, and we're the vessel that supplies it to them. But at every single step of the way, we are there. We follow up monthly when the contract is years old, but we also follow up daily if the contract is very new. It really depends on what state of the relationship is in, but we always try to have a Western face, or at least a Western mindset looking at the problem, as well as the local mindset of whatever country that your developer is in, for example. Okay. So that we can always have a more multifaceted view of a certain challenge. Because working with people that are sitting next to you is already challenging.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Sitting with people that you never see, never get to meet, don't know the culture of, is that
it's even more challenging. Oh,
exactly.
And it's a concept that a lot of people find difficult to deal with, I guess, as well.
I think so too, and I think we're not there yet. But where I see what today is being perceived as really a difficult challenge is going to be much more commonplace in 15 years because of the way the world is evolving. Because your daughter will have much less of an issue dealing with somebody who's in Australia to then double check if the designs were approved by the Japanese counterpart, and then just to have a WhatsApp call to somebody in Argentina. For her, it's going to be like, sure.
That's just how it is. Yes,
exactly.
That's the ceiling and that's the floor, and that's just how the world works.
Exactly. Much. So I think we need to develop the tools for, in those settings, get most out of it. And
is India a deliberate choice?
Well, actually, we went India, and we actually went the two countries next to it. So today,
Pakistan and Bangladesh.
Pakistan and Sri Lanka.
Sri Lanka, okay, yeah.
Yeah, we started in Pakistan with about 10 years ago, and then Sri Lanka came, a couple of years ago to the list. But we deliberately India is already a market which is quite saturated, and I think would be very difficult for a company like ourselves to have any edge over the existing players. So we specifically chose not India.
Okay. Why not the Philippines? Are they saturated as well?
No, I think at one point there's going to be a whole list of other countries that open up. There's Vietnam, that is a good opportunity. Indonesia is also, Philippines. Any country that has basically a whole lot of people.
Yes, and somewhat of an infrastructure.
Exactly, especially in education. Yeah. Because the infrastructure, because to be honest, as long as we have an internet connection and people, we're good.
You're good.
We can make our own electricity, which we do. Yeah. We will have our own backup generators, our own UPSs, our own buildings. The people and the skills that those people come with, that has to be taken care of by the society.
You're a perfect example of the global economy, really, to that extent.
And I think for a lot of people, it's they see this as a risk, but I see this as an opportunity. Yeah, of course, there's risks that things will change, but things are changing so fast that we better adapt.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. It's not the fast that will survive, but it's the people that adapt, I guess. Yes. I have three simple questions left for you, because I'm looking at the time as well, and we're about 35 minutes into the conversation, and usually they're about 30 minutes my talks. But if they're good, they're good. So Jelle, that's a compliment. There you go. There you go. So the question I had in mind was, you're doing business with people in Pakistan, right?
Yeah.
Do you ever get remarks like, "Isn't that dangerous? Aren't there?" Do people comment on the fact that you're dealing with people from Pakistan? Or is that rather neutral? Or
no, to be honest, when we invested in Pakistan, Pakistan was really on the verge of, economy was flourishing. A lot of international companies came in, and it was really Pakistan's heydays. Unfortunately for the country, it's not been very fortunate politically in the last 10 years. And a lot of political instability, a lot of the unrest in Afghanistan also has made it such that
it spills over.
Come in the news quite a lot, and not in a good way.
Yeah.
Now, on the other hand, I've lived in that country for 7 years. And honestly, I've gone to the border of Pakistan at times when this was smart.
Common sense, using common sense.
Exactly. But in those 7 years, I've walked freely. I've done nothing special. Like I went everywhere where I wanted to go, and I've always had a very lovely experience. Like I have not a single bad experience of my 7 years in Pakistan. And I really wonder if a Pakistani would come to Belgium, if he could say the same thing.
Oh, yes.
So that I found that a very warm, welcoming people, unlike what we've seen here on the media. But coming back to your question is, how is it perceived? But I want to negate what is perceived.
Yeah.
It is perceived in that way, but whenever we have customers that are willing to make the jump, we tell them that, look, we will go with you to Pakistan, we will go with you to the office. And we've had so many customers that have taken us up on that offer. And afterwards they go like, oh my God, like, what was I thinking?
It's ignorance. People judge from their ignorance, really.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, good point. I was just curious because just Pakistan is not the most how do you say, not the country that would come up first, top of mind if you talk about the business that you're in.
No, and then I think in Sri Lanka for us is much easier to sell as a country, although that both have very, very skilled.
Yes. One but last question is, that's the most difficult one, and maybe I should have prepped you before the interview, but you'll do fine. And I ask this every guest, is that from your experience and the times that you've spent abroad, and your business experience as well, can you give us 3 tips to become more culturally competent?
Culturally competent?
Well, be more, maybe adapt faster, adapt easier, or maybe tap into your own experience. What have you done when you had to move from one country to the other, or had to deal with somebody from another culture? What have you learned that works for you?
I think, and we're coming back to actually that previous question about Pakistan. My belief is that when you go to a foreign country, or when you're in a situation that you don't really know the culture nor the people, focus first on the people and think about the culture later. Because I think often we come to a meeting with a person and an individual, and there's always these ideas, or what this nationality is supposed to be, or what our perception of these people should be. And I think I like the Zen Buddhist saying, empty your cup. Go to that person and go to that person fully. And I think when that person experiences that you're there with them and not with your preconceptions of or your assumption of what they should be,
yes,
then there's this respect. So I think bring an empty your cup would be one, and then maybe second is come with a full respect of their country, their history, and what the thing that I've always consistently done in whatever country I am, especially for business, I've always been eager to find out what are the cultural signs for respect. Because it really depends in what kind of setting. But in Pakistan, for example, settings can be, especially because they have this British heritage, extremely formal. So I think you have to be very much aware of the rules, and especially if you're not aware of the rules and of the customs to show respect. In certain shaking of hands or waiting your turn to do whatever. I think it's just reading the situation and being aware of which are the signs that other people do that pay respect. Yeah. Because as soon as they see that a foreigner has picked up on those signs, I think, for me, it's a sign of respect to them that, look, I'm here in your country. I respect where you're coming from. And I want to respect that I'm allowed to be here with you. Yes. And I think those actually, I don't know if I would have three, but two
is fine. It's fine. They're really good ones.
Empty your cup and bring a dose of respect.
Yes. Okay, excellent. Jelle, how do people pronounce your name, your first and your last name, by any chance?
Jelle, you pronounce it perfectly, but you're also.
We speak the same. We share the same language. Well, I can do your last name, which is Mattelaer, but that's how does an American or somebody from Sri Lanka say this?
Well, yeah, especially when I go to the States, my name gets to Mattelaer, and often my name gets changed from Jelle to Yellow, or Old Yeller.
Old Yeller. Sounds like a Scotch brand.
Yeah, it could be.
Okay, well, Jelle, if people would like to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do so?
Just through my Jelle, that's Jelle, my first name, and then at my last name .be. That is
your first name dot and then Mattelaer, which is spelled Mattelaer.
Yes, indeed.
I didn't do that by heart. I wrote that down.
Perfect.
All right. Jelle, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for taking the time, even though you're almost next door. We're in the same city. And who knows, we actually might bump into each other one day in the local Kaminsky or something.
Well, I would very much like that. That would be nice.
Thanks again for your time. Take care.
Chris, thank you.
Bye.
You have a good day.